Contractions tore through my body at 3 a.m. I called my husband in agony, but heard his mistress moaning instead. "Is the whale calling you?" she mocked as I silently bled. I recorded everything and sent it to his father, a 4-star general. The healthy tea my husband made me drink every night? It was designed to kill me and our baby. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. The wind was howling like a wounded animal, slamming sheets of freezing rain against the master bedroom windows. It was 3 a.m. in Arlington, Virginia, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the agony tearing through my body. I gripped the silk sheets of our king-sized bed, my knuckles turning white, as another contraction seized me. It felt like an electric shock was being routed directly into my spine. I gasped, trying to breathe through the pain, but the air was stuck in my throat. I was alone. I was 32 years old, a doctor of psychology, a woman who prided herself on being rational and prepared. But as I tried to swing my heavy legs over the side of the bed, a warm gush of liquid soaked my nightgown and the expensive duvet. My water had broken. It was a month too early. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of pain. I wasn't ready. The nursery wasn't fully set up. And my husband, Curtis, wasn't here. My trembling hand fumbled for the phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up the dark room, blinding me for a second. I tapped the speed dial for Curtis. My handsome, charming husband. A lieutenant colonel in the logistics division. He had told me earlier that evening that he had an unscheduled emergency drill at the base. He said the Joint Chiefs were running a simulation and he had to be there. He had kissed my forehead, told me to rest, and left in his dress uniform. I needed to hear his voice. I needed him to tell me everything was going to be okay. I needed him to drive me to Walter Reed. The phone rang. Once. Twice. "Come on, Curtis," I whispered, sweat beading on my forehead. "Pick up." The line connected. But there was no sound of a busy command center. No shouting of orders. No background hum of military machinery. Instead, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze in my veins, stopping the pain of the contraction dead in its tracks. It was a heavy, rhythmic panting. And then, a woman's voice. It wasn't a voice speaking words. It was a moan. A long, broken, wet moan of pure ecstasy. "Curtis." I tried to speak, but my voice was a croak. Then I heard him. My husband. The man I had vowed to spend my life with. The father of the child fighting to get out of me right now. His voice was husky, breathless, dripping with a desire I hadn't heard directed at me in months. "Tiffany, you little devil," he growled. "Don't move like that. You're going to make me lose it." Tiffany. The name hit me harder than the contraction. It wasn't a drill. There was no emergency. While I was here, terrified, gripping the sheets in agony, thinking my baby might be coming too soon, my husband was buried deep inside another woman. My world stopped. The thunder outside seemed to mute. The only thing real was the sound coming from that speaker. Most women would have screamed. They would have yelled his name, cursed him, demanded to know what was happening. And maybe the old Marlene would have done that. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a break, it was a shift. The rational part of my brain, the part that had earned a PhD by analyzing human behavior, took over the controls. I didn't say a word. With a hand that was shaking violently from shock, not pain, I pressed the record button on the call interface. I listened. I forced myself to listen to the symphony of my marriage crumbling. I heard the woman named Tiffany giggle, a high-pitched, breathless sound. I heard the wet slap of flesh against flesh. I heard my husband groan in pleasure, a sound that used to be mine. Is she calling? Tiffany asked, her voice taunting, breathless. Is the whale calling you? Let it ring, Curtis panted. She's probably just asking where the remote is. Ignore it. The whale. That's what they called me. I recorded for 45 seconds. 45 seconds that felt like 45 years. I bit my lower lip so hard I tasted the metallic tang of blood. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and fast, but I didn't make a sound. The call disconnected from their end. He must have finished. Or maybe he just tossed the phone aside to focus on her. I sat there in the dark, the recording saved on my screen. The silence that followed was deafening. Another contraction hit me, this one so strong it doubled me over, forcing a guttural cry from my throat. But this pain was different. This was fuel. I took a deep breath. I wiped the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. I didn't call Curtis back. I opened my contacts and scrolled past his name. I stopped at Frank, driver. I tapped it. Frank, I said when he answered, my voice terrifyingly steady. My water broke. I need you to take me to Walter Reed. Now. I hung up before he could ask questions. Then, I opened my messaging app. I scrolled to a name saved with the utmost respect, General Marshall. He was my father-in-law. The commander of Fort Belvoir. A 4-star general who valued honor and discipline above all else. A man who intimidated everyone, including his own son. I attached the audio file I had just recorded. My finger hovered over the send button for a fraction of a second. I knew what this would do. I knew this was a nuclear bomb. But I also knew that Curtis had made his choice. I pressed send. Then I typed a message. Short. Precise. Dad, my water broke. I'm on my way to Walter Reed. Curtis is busy. Please pray for us. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat of my life and grabbed my hospital bag. I dragged myself downstairs, leaving a trail of fluid and dignity behind me. I was going to have this baby. And if I survived this night, there was going to be a reckoning. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for being here. I know this is heavy, and I appreciate you listening to my story. If you're watching this, let me know in the comments what city or state you're tuning in from. It helps me feel less alone to know real people are out there. Now, let's go back to that rainy night. The drive to the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center was a blur of rain-slicked asphalt and blinding headlights. Frank, our family driver, was driving the black sedan like a man possessed, cutting through the storm with a grim determination. He kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes wide with worry, but he knew better than to ask where Curtis was. My silence filled the car, heavier than the humid air. Every bump in the road sent a fresh wave of agony through my abdomen. I gripped the leather door handle, breathing in short, sharp gasps. In, out. In, out. I had to focus on the baby. I couldn't think about the recording. I couldn't think about the whale comment. If I let my mind go there, I would collapse, and I needed every ounce of strength for my son. When the car screeched to a halt at the emergency entrance, a team was already waiting. Frank must have called ahead. Nurses and orderlies swarmed the car, lifting me onto a gurney before I could even try to stand. BP is sky high, I heard a nurse shout as they rushed me through the automatic doors. Fetal heart rate is dropping. We have distress. The bright fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor flashed overhead like strobe lights in a nightmare. Where is the husband? A doctor asked, running alongside the gurney. We need consent for an emergency C-section if things go south. He's unavailable, I managed to gasp out, clutching the doctor's scrub top. I'll sign it myself. We prefer a family member present for high risk, the doctor said, looking concerned. Is there anyone else? I'm here. The voice boomed through the chaotic hallway, cutting through the noise of beeping monitors and shouting staff. It was a voice that had commanded thousands of troops, a voice that demanded instant silence and respect. The double doors at the end of the hall swung open, and there he was. General Harrison Marshall. He was still in his full-dress uniform, his chest decorated with rows of ribbons and medals that gleamed under the harsh lights. Silver stars shone on each shoulder. He must have come straight from a function, or perhaps he was still working late at the command. His face, usually a mask of stoic discipline, was etched with a terrifying mixture of worry and thunderous rage. Behind him stood 2 armed MPs, military police, their faces impassive, but their presence added a layer of intensity to the scene. "General!" The doctor stopped dead in his tracks, straightening up instinctively. Even in a medical emergency, the hierarchy of the military world held sway. General Marshall ignored the doctor and walked straight to my gurney. He looked down at me, his eyes scanning my pale, sweat-drenched face. He saw the pain, the fear, and the heartbreak that I couldn't hide. "Marlene," he said, his voice softening in a way I rarely heard. He took my trembling hand in his large, calloused one. "I got your message." I nodded, tears finally spilling over. He said he was busy, Dad." The general's jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He pulled his phone from his pocket. It was the military-issued secure line. I saw the audio file on the screen. He had listened to it. He had heard his son, the lieutenant colonel, panting like a dog over another woman while his wife and unborn child were in danger. "I know," he said, his voice low and dangerous, like the rumble of a distant earthquake. "Focus on the baby. You are not alone. You hear me? You are a Marshal by marriage, and we do not break." He looked up at the doctor. "Do whatever you have to do to save my daughter-in-law and my grandson. If you need a signature, you have mine. If you need blood, you take mine. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," the doctor stammered. "We need to get her to the OR now. The baby is in distress." "Go," the general ordered. As they wheeled me away, the last thing I saw was General Marshall standing in the middle of the hallway like a statue. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the entrance of the hospital, his eyes narrowed, waiting. He was waiting for his son. And for the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of pity for Curtis. He had no idea what kind of storm he was walking into. The operating room was cold. So cold. They moved fast, prepping me, draping the sterile sheets. I was shivering uncontrollably. "We're going to put you under general anesthesia," the anesthesiologist said. "There's no time for a spinal block. The baby needs to come out now." I nodded, my vision blurring. "Please," I whispered. "Save Chip. Save my baby." "We've got you," she said, placing the mask over my face. "Count backward from 10. 10. Curtis is with Tiffany. 9. I am alone. 8. The general knows. 7. Darkness. I didn't know if I would wake up. The pain in my heart was heavier than the surgery. But as I drifted into the black void, I held on to one thought, the recording. I had sent the recording. The truth was out. I had lit the fuse, and even if I died on this table, the explosion was inevitable. While I was unconscious, fighting for my life under the bright lights of the operating room, another drama was unfolding in the sterile hallway outside. I learned the details of this later from the nurses who were gossiping about it for weeks. It became a legend at Walter Reed. General Marshall stood guard outside the doors. He refused to sit. He paced back and forth, his boots clicking rhythmically on the linoleum floor. His aides stood at attention a few feet away, silent and alert. The air around the general was thick with tension. Nurses and orderlies gave him a wide berth, sensing the radiating fury. About 20 minutes after I was wheeled in, the sound of running footsteps echoed down the corridor. Dad! Dad, where is she? It was Curtis. He came skidding around the corner, breathless. He was still wearing his dress uniform, but it was a mess. His tie was loosened and crooked. His top button was undone. His hair, usually perfectly gelled, was disheveled. And there, on the collar of his crisp white shirt, visible under the unforgiving hospital lights, was a smudge. A faint, red smudge of lipstick. He looked frantic, playing the role of the worried husband to perfection. I got here as soon as I could. The briefing ran late, and then my phone died, and... He stopped. He stopped because General Marshall had turned to face him. The general didn't say a word. He just watched his son approach. His face was unreadable, which was far more terrifying than if he had been shouting. Is she okay? Is the baby okay? Curtis asked, panting, trying to look past his father toward the operating doors. Why didn't Frank call me sooner? This is insane. I was in the middle of a critical simulation. Smack. The sound was like a gunshot. It was sharp, wet, and incredibly loud. General Marshall had stepped forward and delivered a backhanded slap across Curtis's face with such force that it knocked the lieutenant colonel backward. Curtis stumbled, his legs tangling, and he fell hard onto the polished floor. Blood immediately began to trickle from the corner of his mouth. The entire hallway went silent. Nurses froze mid-step. A doctor dropped a chart. The MPs didn't even blink, staring straight ahead at the wall. Curtis looked up, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. He held his hand to his bleeding lip. Dad? What the hell? I told you, I was at a briefing. A briefing? General Marshall's voice was a low growl, vibrating with disgust. You were at a briefing? Yes. It was classified, I couldn't answer The general reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't just play the audio. He tapped the screen and connected it to the Bluetooth speaker system of the waiting area, which was usually used for announcements. Suddenly, the silence of the hospital corridor was filled with the sounds of heavy breathing and wet, sloppy kisses. Chloe, you little devil. Don't move like that. You're going to make me lose it. Is she calling? Is the whale calling you? Let it ring. She's probably just asking where the remote is. The audio echoed off the walls. Every nurse, every doctor, every patient in the waiting area heard it. The moans. The insults. The undeniable sound of Curtis Anderson betraying his wife while she was in labor. Curtis's face went from red to ghost white in a split second. He scrambled backward on the floor, looking at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. Dad, turn it off. It's not, that's not. That's not what? General Marshall roared. The volume of his voice made everyone jump. That's not you calling my daughter-in-law a whale? That's not you desecrating your vows? That's not you abandoning your post as a husband and a father? He took a step toward his son, and Curtis actually flinched, curling into a ball. You disgrace, the general spat the words out. You look me in the eye and tell me about your briefing now. Tell me. It was a mistake. Curtis cried out, his voice cracking. She means nothing. It was just stress relief. You know how it is, the pressure. Pressure? The general kicked Curtis's leg, not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to show absolute contempt. You don't know the meaning of pressure. Marlene is in there right now, cut open, fighting to bring your child into this world, and you are relieving stress with some cheap tryst? He pointed a shaking finger at Curtis. Look at yourself. Lipstick on your collar. Your uniform in disarray. You aren't an officer. You're a pathetic little boy playing dress-up. Dad, Please, Curtis begged, looking around at the staring crowd, realizing his reputation was being incinerated in real time. Not here. Let's talk about this in private. There is no private anymore, General Marshall said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You made this public when you left her alone to die. You are relieved of duty, Lieutenant Colonel. Go home. Get out of my sight before I forget that I raised you and finish what I started. Curtis scrambled to his feet, wiping the blood from his mouth. He looked at the closed doors of the OR, then at his father's stone-cold face. He knew he had lost. He turned and ran. He ran away from his wife, away from his son, and away from the ruins of his career. As he fled down the hallway, the general stood panting, his chest heaving. He looked at the nurses who were staring at him in awe. As you were, he barked. The hallway instantly sprang back to life, but the energy had shifted. Everyone knew whose side they were on. If you are still listening, please like this video and comment the number 1 below so I know you are amazing and standing by my side on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement to me. Comment 1 so I can recognize you, and now, let's continue with my story. While my body healed in the ICU, my mind drifted. In the quiet moments between nurse checks and the rhythmic beeping of the monitors, I found myself thinking back to how I ended up here. How had I missed the signs? How had I let a monster into my bed? I met Curtis 5 years ago. On paper, we were the perfect match. A modern American fairy tale. I came from a family of academics in Boston. My father was a history professor, my mother a renowned surgeon. I had my PhD in psychology by the time I was 28. I was independent, successful, and logical. I didn't need a man to support me financially. I had my own inheritance from my grandmother and a thriving salary from my research position. Then I met Curtis Anderson. He was everything I wasn't. He was military royalty. The son of the legendary General Harrison Marshall. Curtis was charming, handsome in that classic, square-jawed way, and he swept me off my feet with a confidence that I found intoxicating. But looking back now, with the clarity of betrayal, I realized that his confidence was a mask. A thin veneer covering a deep, rotting pit of insecurity. Curtis suffered from what I should have diagnosed immediately, small man syndrome, though he was over 6 feet tall. He lived entirely in the shadow of his father. General Marshall was a war hero, a man of integrity and immense presence. Curtis was a logistics officer. He managed supply chains. There is honor in all service, of course, but Curtis didn't see it that way. He felt small. He felt judged. And then there was Glenda, my mother-in-law. If the general was the iron backbone of the family, Glenda was the poison running through its veins. She was a socialite, a woman who cared more about the appearance of things than the reality. She had spoiled Curtis rotten since he was a boy, shielding him from the general's strict discipline, telling him he was special, that he deserved everything without having to work for it. I remember a dinner at their estate shortly after we got married. Marlene, dear, Glenda had said, sipping her Chardonnay and looking at me with critical eyes. She ran a finger over the dining table, checking for dust that wasn't there. You really must try to be softer with Curtis. He works so hard. I support him plenty, Glenda, I had replied, trying to keep my tone polite. I just think he needs to take responsibility for his own promotion exams. Nonsense, she sniffed. He's an Anderson. The promotion board should know who he is. You push him too hard with all your intellectual expectations. A wife should be a soft place to land, not a second commanding officer. She looked at Curtis, who was sulking over his steak. My poor boy needs adoration, Marlene. Not analysis. That was the dynamic. Curtis wanted a cheerleader, not a partner. He wanted someone to look at him with wide, worshipful eyes, to tell him he was the greatest man who ever lived, to validate his fragile ego. At first, I tried to be that for him. I dimmed my own light so he could shine. I stopped talking about my research successes because he would get quiet and moody. I focused on being the officer's wife, hosting dinners, wearing the right dresses, smiling at the right jokes. But it was never enough. He started making comments about my job. "Do you really need to work, Marlene? It looks bad for me. People think I can't provide for you." "I work because I love it, Curtis," I would say. "And my salary goes into the college fund for our future children. It's smart planning." "It's emasculating," he would mutter. I brushed it off. I thought it was just stress. I thought marriage was about compromise. I thought if I loved him enough, I could fill that empty hole inside him. How wrong I was. You can't fill a bucket that has no bottom. The cracks widened when I got pregnant. I was ecstatic. Curtis seemed happy, too, at least in public. But in private, he grew distant. He complained that I was boring now that I couldn't go to the officers' club parties and drink with him. He complained that I was getting big. He started spending more time at the base. Late nights, he called them emergency drills. And Glenda? She just fed the fire. "Men have needs, Marlene," she whispered to me once when I complained about his absence. "Pregnancy is hard on a husband, too. You're not exactly available to him right now. Try to be understanding." Understanding. That word now tasted like ash in my mouth. I had been so blind. I had analyzed patients with narcissism, with sociopathic tendencies, yet I had missed the symptoms sleeping right next to me. I had let Glenda gaslight me into thinking I was the problem, that my independence was a flaw, that my intelligence was a burden. Lying in that hospital bed, staring at the sterile ceiling, I realized that the affair didn't start that night. It didn't even start with Tiffany. It started the moment Curtis realized he couldn't control me. He needed a puppet, and I was a woman. So he went looking for a puppet. And he found one. The memory hit me like a physical blow while a nurse was changing my bag. It was a specific memory from about 6 months ago, right when I was entering my second trimester. Curtis had come home early one evening, which was rare. He was carrying a shopping bag from a high-end organic market and a bouquet of flowers. He was smiling, that charming, boyish smile that used to make my knees weak. "I've been thinking," he said, kissing my cheek. "I haven't been supportive enough. You're carrying our son, and I've been distant. I want to change that." I was so relieved. I wanted to believe him so badly. "Oh, Curtis, thank you. That means so much to me. I met someone today," he continued, unpacking the bag. "A health coach. She specializes in prenatal nutrition. She gave me this special herbal tea blend. She said it's amazing for the baby's development and for keeping the mother's energy up." He held up a glass jar filled with dried leaves and flowers. It smelled earthy, pungent. "A health coach?" I asked, slightly skeptical. "Who?" "Her name is Tiffany," he said smoothly. He didn't even blink. "She works with a lot of the officers' wives. She's great. In fact, she offered to send over a weekly supply. I want to make it for you every night. It can be our ritual." And so it began. The ritual. Every night at 8 p.m., Curtis would go into the kitchen. I would hear the kettle whistle. He would come back with a steaming mug of this dark, bitter tea. He would add honey to mask the taste, sitting next to me on the sofa, watching me drink it. "Drink up, babe," he would say, stroking my hair. "It's for Chip. We want him to be strong, right?" "It tastes a bit metallic," I said the first few times. "That's the iron," he insisted. "Tiffany said it's full of iron and minerals. It's good for you." Around the same time, he introduced me to her. We were at a base barbecue. Curtis waved over a young woman. She was petite, blonde, with wide, innocent eyes and a body that looked like it was sculpted in a gym. "Marlene, this is Tiffany," Curtis said. "The health coach I told you about." "Oh. Mrs. Anderson," Tiffany chirped, grabbing my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "It's such an honor. Curtis talks about you all the time. He's so worried about your fragility." "Fragility?" I frowned. "I'm pregnant, not sick." "Of course." She laughed, a tinkling, fake sound. "But you know, at your age, being over 30, it's a geriatric pregnancy technically. We have to be careful. That tea will help keep your uterus calm." I disliked her instantly. It was a gut feeling, a primal instinct. But Curtis seemed so eager to please, and she was supposedly helping me, so I pushed the feeling down. I decided I was being judgmental. But now, looking back, the puzzle pieces slammed into place. After I started drinking the tea, things changed. I became lethargic. I, who used to work 10-hour days and still have energy for yoga, could barely get out of bed. My mind felt foggy. I slept for 12 hours at a time and still felt exhausted. "It's just the pregnancy," Curtis would say, tucking me in. "The doctor said you need rest. Tiffany says the tea induces deep sleep to help the baby grow." Did it? I remembered my last checkup. The obstetrician had frowned at my blood pressure. "It's a bit erratic, Marlene. And your platelet count is slightly low. Are you taking any supplements I don't know about?" "Just prenatal vitamins and some herbal tea," I had said. "What's in the tea?" "Oh, just standard stuff. Red raspberry leaf, ginger." I repeated what Curtis had told me. The doctor had shrugged and let it go. But lying in the hospital bed at Walter Reed, I realized I didn't actually know what was in that jar. I had trusted my husband. I had swallowed cup after cup of that dark liquid, handed to me by the man who was sleeping with the health coach who prescribed it. A cold chill went down my spine, colder than the AC in the room. Why did they want me to sleep so much? Was it just so Curtis could sneak out to be with her? Or was it something more sinister? I thought about the emergency drill lie. I thought about the look on Tiffany's face at the barbecue, that predatory gleam in her eyes when she looked at my belly. "That tea will help keep your uterus calm." That's what she had said. But my water broke a month early. My uterus wasn't calm, it was chaotic. The labor was violent and sudden. My heart started racing. The monitor next to me began to beep faster. Beep, 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 beep. A nurse stuck her head in. "Mrs. Anderson? Are you okay? Your heart rate is spiking." "I need my phone," I said, my voice trembling. "And I need you to call security. I don't want my husband allowed in this room. And I need to speak to General Marshall immediately." "The general is just outside speaking with the doctor," the nurse said. "Get him," I commanded. Now. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. This wasn't just adultery. This wasn't just a cheating husband and a jealous mistress. I had the sickening feeling that I had been poisoned. And I needed to prove it before they could cover their tracks. The anesthesia wore off fully about 5 hours after the surgery. The fog in my brain lifted, leaving behind a sharp, crystalline clarity. I was sore. My incision felt like it was on fire every time I moved. But I was alive. And in the bassinet next to my bed, sleeping under the warming lights, was Chip. My son. Harrison Chip Marshall Anderson. He was tiny, wires attached to his little chest, but he was perfect. He had my nose and, unfortunately, his father's chin. Looking at him, a fierce, protective rage surged through me. I would burn the world down to keep him safe. The door to my room creaked open. I tensed, expecting the general. But it was Curtis. He had cleaned himself up. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a polo shirt. He looked like a sad, kicked puppy. He held a bundle of bodega flowers in one hand. The MPs must have let him in, or maybe he snuck past while they were changing shifts. He approached the bed cautiously. Marlene? I didn't turn my head. I kept my eyes fixed on the baby. Who let you in? Dad left for a meeting with the JAG officers, Curtis whispered. I begged the nurse for 5 minutes. Marlene, please. Look at me. I slowly turned my head. My face was void of emotion. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at him. I'm so sorry, he started, tears welling up in his eyes. He was a good actor. I don't know what happened. I was weak. It was a one-time thing. The stress of the baby, the promotion. I just panicked. But I love you. I love our family. He reached out to touch my hand. I pulled my hand away as if he were radioactive. A one-time thing? I repeated, my voice raspy but steady. You called her Tiffany. You knew her name. You had a routine. Don't insult my intelligence, Curtis. You've been sleeping with her for months. He flinched. It's over. I swear. I blocked her number. I told Dad, well, Dad knows. He's furious. But we can fix this, Marlene. For Chip. He needs a father. He tried to step closer to the bassinet to look at the baby. Stop, I said. It wasn't a shout, but it was sharp enough to freeze him in his tracks. Marlene, he's my son, too, Curtis whined. I inhaled deeply through my nose. And then I smelled it. Beneath the smell of antiseptic and fear, there was a scent clinging to him. It was faint, but unmistakable. A sickly sweet, floral perfume. Gardenia and musk. It was Tiffany's scent. I remembered it from the barbecue. He had hugged her before coming here. Or worse, she had been with him while he was cleaning up. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, I said, using his rank. It created a wall of ice between us. He blinked, confused. Marlene, don't call me that. You should go take a shower, I said. My voice was flat. Dead. What? You smell like her, I said, looking him up and down with absolute disgust. The smell of that woman's cheap perfume is all over you. Our son is a newborn. His respiratory system is delicate. He can't be around foreign contaminants. And frankly, neither can I. Curtis's face crumbled. He looked down at his clothes, then back at me. The shame finally hit him. Not the shame of what he did, but the shame of being caught, of being smelled, of being rejected so clinically. Marlene, please. Get out, I said. And don't come back until you've signed the divorce papers. Divorce? He looked panicked. No. You can't. Think about the scandal. Dad will kill me if you divorce me now. It will ruin his retirement. You should have thought about that before you answered the phone at 3 a.m., I said. At that moment, the door opened again. General Marshall walked in. He took in the scene instantly, Curtis standing there pleading, me looking like an executioner. I thought I told you to leave the premises, the general said to his son. His voice was dangerously quiet. Dad, I just wanted to see my son, Curtis stammered. You lost that right, the general said. MPs. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the room. Escort Mr. Anderson off the base, the general ordered. He is not to return to the hospital without my direct written authorization. If he resists, arrest him. Yes, General. The MPs grabbed Curtis by the arms. Marlene! Marlene, don't do this! Curtis shouted as they dragged him backward. I can explain. It was the tea. She made me do it. Wait. My eyes snapped to his face. What did you say? The tea. Curtis yelled right before the door closed. She said it would fix everything. The door clicked shut. Silence returned to the room. I looked at General Marshall. He looked back at me, confusion on his face. What tea? The general asked. My blood ran cold. He had just confirmed it. He didn't mean to, but in his panic, he had admitted that the tea was part of the plan. She made me do it. Dad, I said, my voice trembling for the first time since surgery. I need you to do something for me. It's urgent. And it has to be secret. Anything, he said. I need someone to go to my house, I whispered. I need them to go to the compost bin in the backyard. Curtis throws the tea dregs there. I need a sample. And I need it tested for poisons. 3 days later, I was discharged. I didn't go back to the house I shared with Curtis. I couldn't. The memory of the tea, the bed where he probably slept with her, it was too toxic. Instead, I moved into a secure apartment at the Vistabella complex in D.C., a place I rented using my own inheritance money. I hired a private security detail, paid for by my own funds. I wasn't taking any chances. But you can't hide from a determined mother-in-law. I was breastfeeding Chip in the living room, trying to get him to latch properly, when the buzzer rang. The concierge voice came over the intercom. Mrs. Anderson? A Mrs. Glenda Anderson is here to see you. She says it's a family emergency. I sighed. I knew this was coming. Send her up. I handed Chip to the nanny I had hired, a lovely older woman named Mrs. Higgins, and told her to take him to the nursery and lock the door. Glenda swept into the apartment like a hurricane in Chanel. She wasn't wearing black, but she might as well have been mourning. She looked furious. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her pearls were gleaming, and her eyes were full of venom. Look at this place, she spat, looking around my modern, minimalist apartment. It's cold. Soulless. Is this where you plan to raise the heir to the Anderson legacy? Hello, Glenda, I said calmly, sitting on the sofa but not inviting her to sit. To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't play coy with me, Marlene, she snapped. I know what you're doing. I heard about the recording. I heard about the scene at the hospital. Curtis is a mess. He's staying at my house, crying his eyes out. He hasn't eaten in days. He should try drinking some herbal tea, I said dryly. I hear it's good for stress. Glenda's eyes narrowed. She didn't catch the reference, or she chose to ignore it. You are being cruel. He made a mistake. Men make mistakes. It's biology. But you are destroying a family over a moment of weakness. Harrison is talking about court-martialing his own son. Do you have any idea what that will do to our social standing? I really don't care about your social standing, Glenda, I said. Your son committed adultery while I was giving birth. He abandoned me. So you forgive him, she shouted, slamming her Hermes bag onto the coffee table. That's what wives do. You forgive, you forget, and you keep the family together. But no, you have to be so righteous. So modern. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a menacing hiss. Let me tell you what's going to happen. You are going to pack your bags. You are going to move back into the main house. You are going to issue a statement saying this was all a misunderstanding caused by postpartum hormones. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was a dry, humorless laugh. You are delusional. Am I? She smiled, a cruel, thin stretching of her lips. Marlene, darling, you are a researcher. You make a pittance compared to the Anderson wealth. We have lawyers on retainer who eat little girls like you for breakfast. If you file for divorce, I will make sure you never see that baby again. My heart skipped a beat. The threat hung in the air. He is an Anderson, Glenda continued, checking her nails. He belongs to us. We can prove you are mentally unstable. Postpartum depression. Hysteria. We will take full custody. And you will be left with nothing but your degrees and your empty pride. She thought she had one. She thought the threat of losing Chip would bring me to my knees. And maybe, if I were the woman I was a year ago, it would have. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I stood up. I walked over to the side table where I had placed a manila folder. It contained the preliminary report from the private investigator I had hired immediately after the hospital. You talk about lawyers and money, Glenda, I said, opening the folder. But you forget something. I'm not poor. My grandmother left me a trust fund that rivals your husband's pension. And as for custody, I pulled out a photo. It was a grainy picture taken by my PI. It showed Curtis meeting with a man in a dark alley behind a warehouse. The man was handing Curtis an envelope thick with cash. What is this? Glenda frowned. That, I said, bluffing slightly because I didn't have the full context yet, but I knew it was bad, is your son engaging in illegal activities? Selling military surplus, perhaps? Or maybe taking bribes? Glenda's face went pale. And, I continued, my voice hard as steel, I have the recording of the affair. In the state of Virginia, adultery is a crime in the military. If you try to take my son, I will release everything. I will burn Curtis's reputation to the ground. I will make sure he goes to Leavenworth Prison for 20 years. And everyone will know that Glenda Anderson raised a criminal and a cheater. I leaned in close to her face. Do you really want to play chicken with me, Glenda? She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. For the first time in her life, she looked unsure. She snatched her bag off the table. You ungrateful. She sputtered. Get out, I pointed to the door. And tell your son that if he wants to see Chip, he can talk to my lawyer. But if you ever threaten me again, I will skip the lawyer and go straight to the press. Glenda turned and fled. She slammed the door so hard the walls shook. I sank back onto the sofa, my hands shaking. It was a bluff, mostly. I didn't want to destroy the general's reputation by exposing Curtis publicly. But Glenda didn't know that. I had bought myself some time. But I knew the war had just begun. And I still needed the results of that T-test. The next day, the buzzer rang again. I checked the monitor, expecting Curtis or Glenda. But the face staring back at the camera made my blood boil. It was Tiffany. She wasn't wearing her yoga clothes. She was wearing a modest white dress, looking like a repentant angel. She had no makeup on, making her look younger and more vulnerable. Mrs. Anderson, her voice came through the speaker, tiny and trembling. Please. I just want to talk. I want to apologize. I hesitated. My instinct was to leave her standing on the sidewalk. But the psychologist in me was curious. And the strategist in me knew that information was power. Come up, I said. When I opened the door, Tiffany immediately dropped to her knees. Literally. She fell onto my entryway rug, clasping her hands together, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I didn't mean to hurt you. We fell in love. We couldn't help it. It was true love. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Get up. You're ruining the rug. She looked up, surprised by my coldness. She slowly stood, wiping her eyes. Marlene, please understand. Curtis was unhappy. He told me how controlling you were. He needed someone who understood him. I tried to stay away, but our connection was cosmic. Cosmic? I raised an eyebrow. Is that what you call having sex with a married man while his wife is in labor? I didn't know you were in labor, she lied. He told me you were asleep. Save the act, Tiffany. I walked into the living room, forcing her to follow. I'm a psychologist. I can spot a narcissist from a mile away, and I can spot a gold digger even faster. Her face hardened slightly. The innocent mask slipped. I'm not a gold digger, she said, her voice losing its tremble. I love him. And he loves me. He's going to leave you. He promised. He promised? I laughed. Curtis promises a lot of things. Did he promise to make you the general's daughter-in-law? Is that the goal? The prestige? The money? He chose me, she shouted, dropping the act entirely. I can give him what you can't. I make him feel like a man. You make him feel like a child. And I can give him more children. Better children. I stared at her. This was it. The leverage I needed. I walked over to the kitchen counter where I had my laptop open. I had done my research. I had called in favors from friends in the medical field. It was a breach of privacy, perhaps, but when you're fighting a devil, you don't play by the rules. Better children? I asked softly. That's interesting. I turned the laptop around so she could see the screen. It wasn't a medical record that would be illegal to show her. It was a social media profile from 6 years ago. An old blog she thought she had deleted. Tiffany Vance, I read. Former exotic dancer in Miami. 3 documented visits to clinics in Florida. Her face went white. How did you find that? The internet never forgets, Tiffany, I bluffed. I actually had a PI find it. But here's the thing. I also know about the complications. The scarring. The doctors told you that carrying a child to term would be nearly impossible, didn't they? It was a gamble. A calculated guess based on the forums she used to frequent under a pseudonym. Tiffany froze. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. I had hit the bullseye. Does Curtis know? I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Does he know that his cosmic love is looking for a meal ticket because she can't give him the one thing the Anderson family demands? An heir? Shut up, she screamed. You don't know anything. I know enough, I said. I know you need Curtis to secure your future. And I know you used that tea to try and get rid of my baby. Her eyes went wide. Genuine terror flashed across her face. I didn't, it was just vitamins. Was it? I pressed. Because if I test that tea and find anything else, Tiffany, that's not adultery. That's attempted murder. And since it happened on a military base, involving an officer's family, that's federal prison. No parole. Tiffany started to shake. Real shaking, not the fake sobbing from earlier. He made me, she blurted out. He said if the baby was gone, he could leave you easier. He said the general wouldn't care if there was no heir. She clamped her hand over her mouth, realizing what she had just confessed. I smiled. A cold, terrifying smile. Thank you, Tiffany. You just gave me everything I needed. You bitch. She lunged at me. But I sidestepped. I have security downstairs. If you don't leave in 10 seconds, I'm calling the police. And Tiffany? Start saving your money for a lawyer. You're going to need a really good one. She looked at me with pure hatred, then turned and ran out of the apartment. I closed the door and locked it. My heart was pounding. She had confirmed it again. Curtis and she had conspired to kill Chip. It wasn't just poison, it was a hit job. Just then, my phone rang. It was the general. Marlene, his voice was grave. The lab results are back on the sample from the compost bin. You need to come to my office. Now. I drove to Fort Belvoir with a sense of dread that was heavy enough to crush my ribs. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets of Virginia slick and black, reflecting the streetlights like shattered mirrors. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, and my mind was racing faster than the engine of my sedan. I had left Chip with Mrs. Higgins and Tony, my security guard, with strict instructions: no one enters, no one leaves. When I arrived at the main gate of the base, the military police didn't ask for my ID. They just saluted. It was a sharp, crisp movement, but I saw the look in their eyes. It wasn't just respect anymore, it was a mixture of pity and something else: curiosity. The rumor mill on a military base travels faster than light. Everyone knew the lieutenant colonel was banned. Everyone knew the general was on a warpath. And everyone knew I was the woman at the center of the hurricane. I parked in the designated spot outside the command headquarters and walked up the concrete steps. The building was a fortress of brick and stone, designed to withstand attacks, but the attack happening inside tonight was internal. It was a cancer eating away at the heart of the Anderson legacy. General Marshall's executive assistant, a woman named Lieutenant Coburn who usually greeted me with a warm smile, looked pale. "He's waiting for you, ma'am," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Go right in." I opened the heavy oak door to the general's office. The room smelled of lemon polish, old books, and stale coffee. General Marshall was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, but he wasn't working. He wasn't reading reports or looking at maps. He was staring at a single, thick manila envelope resting on the green leather blotter in front of him. His face, usually a mask of iron discipline, looked gray. The lines around his mouth were deeper than I had ever seen them, etched by a grief that no parent should ever have to feel. "Sit down, Marlene," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. I sat in the chair opposite him. It felt like sitting in a witness box. "You were right," he said, finally lifting his eyes to meet mine. They were red-rimmed. My men, they secured the contents of the compost bin. They also took samples from the tea canisters in your kitchen at the old house. I had them sent to a private forensic toxicology lab in D.C., completely outside the military chain of command. I needed to be sure. I needed to know that I wasn't destroying my own son over a misunderstanding. He pushed the envelope toward me. "Read it." My hand trembled as I reached for it. This was the moment of truth. Part of me, the foolish, sentimental part, still hoped it was just chamomile. Maybe he just wanted me to sleep. Maybe he was just a cheater, not a killer. I pulled out the report. It was heavy. The header read, "Confidential Toxicology Assessment Priority Alpha." I skipped the dense paragraphs of chemical methodology and went straight to the analysis section. The words jumped out at me, clinical and terrifying. Sample A, tea canister positive for Camellia sinensis, black tea base. Sample B, compost residue positive for extremely high concentrations of Carthamus tinctorius, safflower, and Ligusticum wallichii, Szechuan lovage. Analysis note: the concentration of active alkaloids in sample B suggests the use of industrial-grade extracts, not natural leaf matter. The dosage is approximately 50 times higher than what is found in standard over-the-counter herbal supplements. I looked up at the general. 50 times? "Keep reading," he whispered. I turned the page to the toxicology assessment. While safflower and lovage are used in traditional medicine for blood circulation, they are strictly contraindicated during pregnancy. In high, concentrated doses, they act as potent abortifacients. They stimulate violent uterine contractions and act as powerful anticoagulants, blood thinners. Prolonged ingestion during the third trimester would significantly weaken the placental attachment. Conclusion: ingestion of this mixture prior to labor poses a severe risk of placental abruption and uncontrollable postpartum hemorrhage. The intent of such a dosage is inconsistent with therapeutic use and consistent with the induction of fetal demise or maternal exsanguination. The paper slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the desk. The room spun. Maternal exsanguination. That was the medical term for bleeding to death. He was thinning my blood, I whispered, the horror rising in my throat like bile. That's why I was so tired. That's why the obstetrician was worried about my platelet count. He wasn't just trying to make me sleep, Dad. He was prepping me to die. I remembered the surgery. I remembered the doctor shouting, "We're having trouble stopping the bleeding. Get more O-negative in here." I remembered the coldness that had seeped into my bones, a coldness I thought was just the room temperature. It was death. I had been knocking on death's door, and my husband had been the one who drove me there. He didn't just want a miscarriage, General Marshall said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. He knew you were entering the 9th month. A miscarriage at that stage, with blood thinners in your system, he wanted a tragedy. A natural tragedy. He wanted to be a widower, I said, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. Divorce is messy. Divorce ruins his reputation. But a grieving widower? That's sympathetic. That's noble. He could play the sad, heartbroken father for a year, and then, oh God. And then he would find comfort in the arms of his health coach. It was diabolical. It was so calculated, so cold, it didn't seem possible that the man who used to bring me coffee in bed could have conceived it. But narcissists don't see people, they see obstacles. I was an obstacle. Chip was an obstacle. And Tiffany had given him the weapon to remove us. Why? I asked, tears of shock stinging my eyes. Why go this far? He could have just left. He could have just walked away. The general stood up. He walked over to a large wall safe in the corner of the room. He spun the dial, left, right, left, the clicks echoing loudly in the silent office. Because, he said, pulling out another stack of documents, it wasn't just about the affair. It was about money. And it was about fear. He walked back and slammed the new documents down next to the toxicology report. The thud made me jump. My intelligence officers have been digging since the hospital incident, the general said. You were right about Tiffany Vance. But you didn't know the half of it. Tiffany isn't just a failed dancer looking for a rich husband. Her father is Howard Vance. Vance Construction? I asked. I recognized the name. They were a massive contractor in the D.C. area. The very same, the general nodded grimly. For 2 years, Vance Construction has been trying to bid on the new barracks renovation project here at Fort Belvoir. It's a massive contract. $40 million. I rejected their bid twice because their safety record is garbage. He opened the file. It was filled with bank transfers and emails. Tiffany Vance approached Curtis 6 months ago. It wasn't a chance meeting. It was a honeypot operation. She seduced him, yes. But then she trapped him. He pointed to a highlighted spreadsheet. Vance Construction has been funneling money into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The signatory on that shell company is Tiffany Vance. And 3 months ago, Curtis signed off on a procurement order classifying 4 tons of high-grade structural steel and copper wiring as scrap metal to be sold at auction. The winner of that auction? A subsidiary of Vance Construction. My jaw dropped. He's selling military assets? He's stealing from the army? He's selling my base for pennies on the dollar, the general roared, slamming his fist on the desk. To fund his mistress's lifestyle. And here is the kicker. Tiffany has him on tape taking the bribes. She has been blackmailing him, Marlene. She told him to get rid of you, the controlling wife who might ask too many questions, or she would send those tapes to the JAG. It all clicked into place. The desperation in Curtis's eyes. The sweat. The panic. He wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a trapped rat. He was caught between federal prison for corruption and a murder plot for freedom. And being the coward he was, he chose the path that he thought would leave no witnesses. I sat there, frozen, staring at the two piles of paper that defined the end of my life as I knew it. One pile proved my husband wanted to kill me. The other proved he was a traitor to his country. He's done, I said softly. He's going to prison for the rest of his life. He is dead to me, General Marshall corrected. He walked back to his desk and sat down heavily. The leather chair groaned under his weight. He looked at the framed photo on his desk, a picture of Curtis as a boy, saluting in a miniature uniform, smiling with a gap-toothed innocence that was now heartbreaking to behold. The general picked up the photo. His thumb traced the glass over the boy's face. I saw his hand shaking. I failed him, the general whispered. I raised him with everything I had. Discipline. Honor. Integrity. I gave him the best schools, the best training. I pushed him, yes, but I thought I was forging steel. Instead, I broke him. I created a man so weak he would sell his soul for a little adoration and a pile of cash. You didn't make him a monster, Dad, I said, reaching across the desk to touch his trembling hand. He made his own choices. Glenda, she enabled him, yes. She shielded him from consequences. But this? This level of evil? That's not on you. That's on him. The general took a deep breath, a shuddering sound that seemed to rattle his ribs. He placed the photo face down on the desk. The sound of the glass hitting the wood was final. I have a duty, he said, his voice hardening, the soldier taking over the father. To this base. To the army. To the soldiers who serve under me. And to you and that little boy. He reached for the phone on his desk. Not his cell phone. And not the standard office line. He reached for the red phone. The secure line that connected directly to the Pentagon and the highest levels of military justice. Dad, I said, realizing the magnitude of what he was about to do. If you make that call, there is no going back. It's over. For the family name. For everything you built. The scandal will be unimaginable. He looked at me, his eyes hard as flint, but burning with a cold, righteous fire. The family name is already stained, Marlene. Curtis stained it when he touched that money and when he mixed that poison. If I cover this up, I am no better than him. The only way to clean the name is to cut out the rot myself. He picked up the receiver. Get me the Judge Advocate General, he ordered into the mouthpiece. His voice was steady, stripped of all emotion. This is General Harrison Marshall. I am reporting a Priority 1 violation involving a senior officer at Fort Belvoir. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. The officer is Lieutenant Colonel Curtis Anderson, he said, pronouncing each syllable with deliberate clarity. Charges include grand larceny, bribery, conduct unbecoming an officer, and conspiracy to commit murder. He looked me in the eye as he said the last part. Yes, I have the evidence, he continued. I have the toxicology reports and the financial records. I want him picked up immediately. He is currently at the residence of Mrs. Glenda Anderson in Georgetown. Consider him a flight risk. He has access to offshore funds. He listened for another moment. Yes. Do it now. He hung up the phone. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on us like a physical weight. But it was a clean silence. The secret was out. The machinery of justice had been activated, and there was no stopping it now. The general had just signed his own son's warrant. "Go home, Marlene," the general said softly, turning his chair to look out the window at the rain-soaked parade grounds. "Go hold your son. The MPs will handle the rest. You don't need to see this." "No," I said, standing up. I smoothed the front of my trench coat. "I do need to see it. I need to see him face the consequences. I need to see the look on his face when he realizes he can't charm his way out of this. I need closure, Dad." The general turned back to me. He studied my face, seeing the resolve that had replaced the fear. "Very well," he said. "You can ride with the arresting unit. But you stay in the vehicle. I won't have you in the line of fire if he does something stupid." "Thank you, Dad." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just raise that boy to be a better man than his father. Break the cycle." I nodded. "I will." The convoy of military police vehicles moved through the streets of Georgetown like a dark, silent predator hunting its prey. I was in the back of the lead SUV, sitting next to Major Davidson from the Criminal Investigation Division, CID. The rain had stopped, but the streets were wet and slick, reflecting the streetlights in long, distorted streaks. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was the house where I had endured so many passive-aggressive dinners. This was the house where Glenda had told me I wasn't good enough, where she had mocked my career and undermined my marriage. And now, it was the fortress where my husband was hiding, shielded by his mother's money and denial. "We're approaching the target," Major Davidson said into his radio. "All units, standard containment. Non-lethal unless engaged. The subject is a high-ranking officer, but he is to be treated as a hostile suspect." The convoy screeched to a halt in front of the wrought iron gates of the Anderson estate. The flashing blue lights erupted, cutting through the darkness of the upscale neighborhood. "Stay in the car, ma'am," Major Davidson said as he opened his door. "Do not exit under any circumstances." I watched through the tinted glass. I felt like a spectator at my own life's climax. The MPs didn't wait for the intercom. One of them used a heavy bolt cutter to snap the lock on the pedestrian gate, and they swarmed the driveway. A dozen tactical officers in full gear surrounded the house. They pounded on the heavy oak door. Bang. 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 "Federal agents. Open up." A few seconds later, the porch light flicked on. The door swung open. It was Glenda. She was wearing a silk dressing gown, a martini glass in her hand. Even from the car, I could see her face contorted with indignation. She was shouting, waving her free hand, trying to block the doorway with her frail body. "How dare you!" I could almost hear her screeching. "Do you know who I am? Get off my porch!" But federal agents executing an arrest warrant for treason and murder don't care about social standing. Two officers gently but firmly moved her aside. She stumbled, spilling her drink, and grabbed onto the doorframe for support. She looked terrified, her world of privilege crumbling in seconds. The lights went on in the upstairs bedroom window, Curtis's old room. The room where he grew up believing he was a prince. Minutes passed. Agonizingly slow minutes. Then, the front door opened again. Two MPs marched Curtis out. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a t-shirt. His hands were cuffed behind his back. He was barefoot. He looked small. Without the uniform, without the medals, without the arrogance, he looked like exactly what he was, a pathetic, frightened man who had gambled everything and lost. He stumbled slightly as they led him down the steps, his head hanging low. Glenda was running after them, screaming, clawing at the arms of the officers. "Let him go! He didn't do anything!" It's a mistake. Call Harrison. Call the general. One of the officers turned and said something to her, likely a warning about obstruction of justice, and she froze. She stood there on the wet driveway, barefoot in her silk robe, watching helplessly as they shoved her precious boy toward the cruiser. And then, Curtis stopped. He looked up. He saw the lead SUV. He saw me. The interior light was on, illuminating my face. He stopped struggling. He looked right at me. His eyes were wide, hollow, filled with a mixture of shock and pleading. He mouthed one word, Marlene. He took a step toward the car, as if he thought I might roll down the window and save him. As if he thought a smile or a charm offensive could fix this. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I didn't wave. I just stared at him, letting him see the absolute zero in my eyes. I wanted him to see the face of the whale who had just orchestrated his downfall. I wanted him to see the face of the woman he tried to kill. The MP pushed his head down and guided him into the back of the car. The door slammed shut. As they drove him away, my phone buzzed. It was a text from the general. Tiffany Vance has been apprehended at Dulles Airport. She was trying to board a one-way flight to Cancun with $50,000 in cash and a bag full of jewelry. She's in custody. It's over. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 months. My shoulders dropped. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. Are you okay, ma'am? The driver asked. I'm fine, I said, opening my eyes. I'm better than fine. Take me home to my son. The weeks following the arrest were a media circus. The general's son and the poison plot was the headline on every tabloid and news station. Glenda tried to spin it, hiring PR firms to paint Curtis as a victim of a predatory mistress, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The audio recording of the affair had leaked. I suspect the general might have let it happen, and public sympathy was entirely with me. I stayed out of the spotlight. I focused on Chip. I focused on healing my body. But the legal battle was just beginning. 2 weeks before the court-martial was set to begin, Curtis's defense attorney requested a meeting. He was a high-priced shark named Mr. Sterling, known for getting high-profile criminals off with a slap on the wrist. Glenda was paying his exorbitant fees, of course. They came to my lawyer's office in downtown D.C. Glenda was there, too, looking haggard. She had aged 10 years in a month. Her hands shook constantly, and she kept looking at the door as if expecting the police to come for her too. Mrs. Anderson, Mr. Sterling began, smoothing his expensive silk tie. We are here to discuss a plea arrangement regarding the civil aspects of this case. I'm listening, I said, bouncing Chip on my knee. I had brought him with me on purpose. I wanted them to see the child they had tried to erase. My client is facing a very lengthy prison sentence, Sterling said, his voice oily and smooth. The military charges are severe. However, the charge of attempted murder is tricky to prove beyond a reasonable doubt without a direct confession. We are willing to offer you a deal to streamline the process. A deal? I scoffed. He poisoned me. He stole from the army. What kind of deal could you possibly offer? Allegedly, Sterling said. Here is the proposal. Curtis will plead guilty to the corruption charges, the larceny, and the adultery. He will accept a dishonorable discharge and a prison term of 10 to 12 years. And the attempted murder charge? My lawyer asked. In exchange for you dropping the civil suit for attempted murder and assault, Sterling said, sliding a thick document across the table, Curtis will sign over full, sole legal, and physical custody of Harrison. He will waive all visitation rights until the child is 18. He will also transfer his entire share of the Anderson family trust, the deed to the marital home in Arlington, and his personal savings to you immediately as restitution. Glenda let out a strangled sob. My money, that's Anderson money, he's giving it all away. Shut up, Glenda, I said, my voice cutting through her whining like a knife. You don't get a vote here. I looked at the paper. Full custody. No visitation. Financial security for Chip for the rest of his life. It was a tempting offer. If I pursued the attempted murder charge to the bitter end, it would drag on for years. Curtis might get 20 years instead of 12, but I would be tied up in court, reliving the trauma, testifying over and over again. And there was always a tiny chance a jury might not convict on the murder charge if Sterling spun the herbal supplement defense well enough. He was just trying to help her sleep, they would say. He didn't know it was dangerous. But this was a guarantee. Chip would be safe. Curtis would be out of our lives legally and physically. He will have no contact? I asked. No phone calls? No letters? None, Sterling confirmed. He ceases to exist as a father in the eyes of the law. I looked at Chip. He was sleeping peacefully, drooling slightly on his bib. He didn't deserve a childhood defined by court dates and a father who tried to kill him. He deserved peace. He deserved to grow up without looking over his shoulder. I have one condition, I said. Name it, Sterling said, looking relieved. I want him to admit it, I said. Not in a signed document. I want him to admit it to my face. Before I sign this. I want to hear him say that he knew what was in that tea. Sterling looked at Glenda, then at his notes. He nodded. Arranged. We can have him brought to the holding cell meeting room. No, Glenda shouted, standing up. You can't make him do that. My boy is innocent. He was manipulated by that slut Tiffany. She reached into her purse. For a second, my security guard flinched, but she only pulled out a checkbook. She slammed it on the table. I'll pay you, she hissed at me, her eyes wild. How much do you want? 1 million? 2. Take the money and drop the charges. Let him come home. We can send him to a facility in Europe. He just needs rest. I looked at the checkbook, then at her pitiful, desperate face. You still don't get it, I said quietly. This isn't about money, Glenda. It's about safety. Your son is a predator. And I don't sell my son's safety. I turned to Sterling. Bring him in. Half an hour later, they brought Curtis into the conference room. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looked gaunt, unshaven, and broken. He sat down, refusing to look at me. Say it, I said. Marlene. He started, his voice cracking. Say it, I commanded. Or I walk out, and I make sure you get life in Leavenworth. He took a ragged breath. He looked up, his eyes filling with tears. I knew. Knew what? I knew about the herbs, he whispered. I knew they were dangerous. Tiffany told me. She said if you hemorrhaged, it would look natural. I wanted out. I was scared. I'm sorry. It was pathetic. It was the confession of a weak, selfish man. But it was the truth. Sign the papers, I told my lawyer. I signed my name with a steady hand. I walked out of that office a wealthy woman, a single mother with full custody, and a survivor. I had traded a few years of his prison sentence for a lifetime of freedom for my son. It was a bargain I would make every single time. The court-martial took place 3 weeks later in a secure, windowless courtroom at the Washington Navy Yard. The atmosphere was stark, cold, and terrifyingly formal. A panel of 5 senior officers sat in judgment on a raised dais, their faces impassive. I was there as the primary witness for the prosecution on the conduct charges. Even though I had settled the civil suit regarding the attempted murder, the military was still prosecuting him for the corruption, the larceny, the conduct unbecoming, and the conspiracy. The Army does not take kindly to officers who sell their honor. The highlight, if you can call it that, was seeing Curtis and Tiffany in the same room for the first time since their arrest. They were seated at separate defense tables. Tiffany looked horrific. The prison system had stripped away her glamour. Her hair was dull, tied back in a messy bun. Her skin was sallow, breakout-ridden from stress. She wore a gray jumpsuit that hung off her frame. She glared at Curtis with a hatred so intense it felt like heat radiating across the room. Curtis just stared at the table, shrinking into himself. When the prosecutor called Tiffany to the stand as a cooperating witness, she was trying to reduce her own sentence. She didn't hold back. She squealed on him like a rat on a sinking ship. "It was his idea," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Curtis when the prosecutor asked about the poisoning plot. "He told me he hated her. He told me she was a cold fish. He said if I didn't help him get the money from my dad's company, he would dump me. He used me." "Objection!" Sterling shouted. "The witness is speculating on my client's state of mind." "Overruled," the judge barked. "Continue." "And the tea?" the prosecutor asked, pacing in front of the stand. "Who procured the ingredients?" "I did," Tiffany sobbed, trying to summon tears. "But he begged me for it. He said, 'Give me something to flesh it out.' That's what he called the baby. It. He said he didn't want to be tied to her forever. He said if the baby was born, he'd be trapped in that marriage." A gasp went through the small gallery. I felt sick, clutching my hands together to stop them from shaking. Flush it out. My son. My beautiful boy. To him, he was just waste to be flushed. Then it was Curtis's turn. He took the stand in his own defense, a desperate Hail Mary. He tried to play the victim, the manipulated man who fell under the spell of a femme fatale. "She blackmailed me," he whined, his voice thin and reedy. "She had the tapes of the bribes. She said she would ruin my father. I did it to protect the general. I never wanted to hurt Marlene. And the tea, she told me it was just a mild sedative. I didn't know it was poison. I swear." "You liar!" Tiffany shrieked from her table, leaping to her feet. "You checked the dosage every night. You Googled safflower overdose symptoms on your phone. Check his search history." He wanted to know how long it would take for her to bleed out. The courtroom erupted. "Order! Order!" The judge banged his gavel so hard I thought the handle would snap. "Restrain the defendant." MPs grabbed Tiffany and forced her back into her chair. It was a circus. A disgusting, vile display of two narcissists trying to drown each other to stay afloat. They were tearing each other apart, exposing every dirty secret, every cruel text message, every moment of their illicit affair. And I sat there, watching the man I had vowed to love and cherish turn into a sniveling worm. When I was called to the stand, the room went quiet. I walked up, swore on the Bible, and sat down. I looked at the panel of judges. I didn't look at Curtis. The prosecutor asked me to recount the night of the birth. I told the story simply, without embellishment. I told them about the call. I played the recording. Hearing those moans again in that silent courtroom was devastating. It echoed off the walls, the sound of my husband betraying me while I was in agony. But it sealed his fate. The panel members looked at Curtis with pure disgust. In the military, adultery isn't just a sin, it's a crime against good order and discipline. Combined with the corruption and the poisoning plot, he was finished. Before I stepped down, the defense attorney, Sterling, tried one last tactic to discredit me. "Mrs. Anderson," he said, buttoning his jacket. "You say you felt threatened. Yet you stayed in the marriage for months while feeling tired. Isn't it true that you are a psychologist? Shouldn't you have noticed the signs?" He was victim-blaming. It was low. I looked him dead in the eye. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice steady. Trust is not a pathology. I trusted my husband because that is what a marriage is. The fact that he weaponized my trust to try and kill me does not make me a bad psychologist. It makes him a sociopath. And frankly, the fact that you are defending his attempt to murder his unborn son says a lot about your own moral compass. The prosecutor smiled. Sterling turned red and muttered, "No further questions." As I walked past the defense table, Curtis looked up. His eyes were red, rimmed with dark circles. He reached out a hand, as if to touch my sleeve. "Marlene," he whispered. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't even blink. I kept walking, right out the heavy double doors, leaving him in the pit he had dug for himself. The verdict came down 3 days later. Lieutenant Colonel Curtis Anderson, guilty on all charges. Sentenced to 12 years in the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Leavenworth. Dishonorable discharge. Forfeiture of all pay and allowances. Tiffany Vance, guilty of conspiracy, bribery, and accessory to assault. Sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Her father, Howard Vance, was also indicted on RICO charges for the bribery scheme. Justice. It was swift, and it was severe. But the real shock, the final twist that recontextualized my entire marriage, came 6 months later. I was living in Boston by then, having moved back to be closer to my parents. I had opened a small private practice. Chip was crawling, a happy, babbling bundle of joy. We were healing. Then, a letter arrived. The return address was Leavenworth. I debated burning it unopened. I held it over the trash can for a long time. But curiosity, my fatal flaw, and my greatest professional asset, won out. I opened it. It was from Curtis. But it wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It wasn't a rant about how unfair the trial was. It was a confession of a different kind. A secret that had been festering in the dark for 30 years. Marlene. I know you hate me. You should. I deserve it. I've had a lot of time to think in here. To think about why I am the way I am. Why I always felt like an imposter in my own life. Why I hated myself so much that I tried to destroy you just to feel powerful. There's something you don't know. Something even Dad, the general, doesn't talk about. I found out when I was 16. I heard Mom screaming it at him during a fight when she was drunk. I'm not his son. Mom had an affair with a junior officer while Dad was deployed in Vietnam. When Dad came back, he was injured. The doctors told him he was sterile from the shrapnel injuries. He knew I wasn't his. He knew the math didn't work. He knew the dates were off. But he claimed me anyway. To save the family face. To avoid the scandal. He raised another man's bastard as his heir. He gave me his name. That's why he was so hard on me, Marlene. Every time he looked at me, he didn't see a son. He saw his wife's betrayal. He saw the living proof of his own humiliation walking around his house. That's why nothing I did was ever good enough. Because I was born a lie. And Mom, she spoiled me out of guilt. She tried to buy my love because she knew she had forced me into a lie. She knew that if the truth ever came out, she would lose everything. I spent my whole life trying to be General Marshall's son, knowing deep down I was just a mistake. When I met you, you were so perfect. So real. You came from a family that loved you for you. You made me feel like even more of a fake. Tiffany, she made me feel like a king in a garbage heap. She didn't ask me to be better. She just wanted the dirt. She accepted the rot because she was rotten too. I'm not asking for pity. I'm just telling you the truth. The only truth I have left. Don't let Chip be like me. Tell him his grandfather is a hero. Don't tell him about me. Let the Anderson lie die with me in here. Goodbye, Curtis. I sat on my porch, the letter shaking in my hand. The autumn wind blew leaves across the yard, but I didn't feel the cold. It made sense. All of it. The tension in the house. Curtis's desperate need for validation. Glenda's frantic, almost manic need to protect him from the General's judgment. The General's cold distance mixed with duty. It was a tragedy that spanned generations. A cycle of lies and secrets that had finally crashed into my life and destroyed it. Curtis wasn't just a narcissist, he was a man who had been hollowed out by a secret before he was even born. I looked at the letter one last time. I thought about keeping it. I thought about showing it to Chip one day. But no. That would just pass the poison on to the next generation. Chip didn't need to know that his father was a product of betrayal. Chip needed to know that he was loved. I walked into the kitchen, struck a match, and held it to the corner of the paper. I watched it burn until it was nothing but ash in the sink. I turned on the faucet and washed the ash away. I would respect his last wish. Chip would know his grandfather was a hero. He would know his mother loved him. And he would know that his father was just a shadow that passed through our lives. The secret died with the fire. A year after the trial, I received news that Glenda had suffered a massive stroke. The stress of the trial, the public humiliation of her son's conviction, and the loss of her social standing had finally broken her. She was in a high-end memory care facility just outside of Boston. The General had moved her there to be close to family, though he lived in a separate apartment nearby. He paid for her care, dutiful to the end, but he rarely visited. I didn't have to go. No one would have blamed me if I didn't. She had threatened me. She had tried to steal my son. She was a monster in pearls. But I needed closure. And I needed to see the end of the story. I walked into her room. It was filled with expensive flowers, but underneath the floral scent was the undeniable smell of sickness and age. Glenda was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, staring at a bird feeder. She looked tiny. The formidable socialite who had terrorized me for years was gone. In her place was a frail, shrunken old woman with thinning hair and a mouth that drooped on one side. "Glenda?" I said softly. She turned. Her eyes were cloudy, confused. She blinked, trying to focus on my face. "Tiffany," she rasped. Her voice was a broken croak. My heart squeezed. Even in her dementia, that name was at the forefront of her mind. "No," I said, walking closer. "It's Marlene." "Marlene?" She frowned, her brow furrowing as she tried to place the name. Then, a flicker of recognition. Her eyes widened. She reached out a shaking hand, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. Is Curtis coming? Is my boy coming home?" "No, Glenda," I said gently, not pulling away. "Curtis can't come. He's away. He's safe, but he can't come." "He's a good boy," she whispered, tears leaking from her eyes and tracking through the deep wrinkles on her cheeks. "He didn't mean it. It was that woman. She made him do it. My boy is a good boy." She was still rewriting history. Still protecting the lie. Even now, at the end of her life, she couldn't face the truth of who her son was. She had built a fortress of denial so strong that not even a stroke could bring it down. "I know you loved him," I said. I didn't validate the lie, but I acknowledged the emotion. "You loved him very much. Don't tell Harrison." She suddenly gripped my hand tighter, her nails digging into my skin. Her eyes were wide with panic. "Don't tell him about the baby. He'll kill me. He'll leave me." The lieutenant, he promised he wouldn't tell. She was talking about the affair. She was talking about Curtis's father. The secret was haunting her, a ghost she couldn't escape. I leaned down and smoothed the hair back from her forehead. "It's okay, Glenda," I whispered. "The secret is safe. No one is going to hurt you. It's over. Harrison knows, and he's still taking care of you. You're safe." She relaxed, her grip loosening. She looked at me with a moment of shocking lucidity. "You were too good for us," she mumbled. "Too strong. I hated you because you were strong. I was never strong." It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get. And surprisingly, it was enough. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was understanding. She was a weak woman who raised a weak son, and they had both been crushed by their own lies. I stayed for another hour, reading a fashion magazine to her until she fell asleep. As I walked out of the nursing home into the crisp autumn air, I felt lighter. I had carried the anger for so long, a heavy stone in my chest. Leaving it there, in that room with the dying woman, felt like finally taking a full breath. 2 weeks later, General Marshall came to visit my new home in Boston. He had fully retired from the service. He wore civilian clothes, a beige cardigan and slacks that looked strange on his soldier's frame. He looked softer, less like a monument and more like a grandfather. He brought a gift for Chip. A heavy envelope. "It's a trust fund," he said gruffly, standing in my living room, refusing to sit down at first. "For his education. And for whatever he needs. I sold the estate in Georgetown. I don't need that big empty house anymore." "Thank you, Dad," I said. He looked at Chip, who was building a tower of blocks on the rug. The general got down on one knee. It was a struggle for his old joints, but he did it. "Harrison," he said. He refused to call him Chip. He used his full name. "Come here, soldier." Chip looked up and grinned. He tottered over and handed the general a blue block. The general took it like it was a medal of honor. His eyes watered. "He looks like you," the general said to me, his voice thick. "But he has the Anderson stubbornness." "He has the martial honor," I corrected him gently. The general looked at me sharp. He froze. He knew that I knew. He knew about the letter. He knew that I knew Curtis wasn't his blood. "You kept the name," he said, his voice trembling. "After everything, after what Curtis did, after what you know, you let him carry the name." "He is your grandson, Dad," I said firmly. "Blood is biology. Family is who shows up. You showed up. You saved us. You are the only father I respect. You are the only grandfather he will ever know. That is what matters." The old general stood up. Tears were openly streaming down his face now. He didn't wipe them away. He pulled me into a hug. It was stiff and awkward, smelling of Old Spice and wool, but it was real. "Thank you," he whispered into my hair. "Thank you for giving me a second chance to get it right." "We are family," I said. "And this time, we build it on truth." He stayed for dinner. Watching him feed Chip mashed potatoes, seeing the softness in the face of a man who had sent armies to war, I knew we were going to be okay. The toxicity had been pruned away. The rot was gone. What was left was the healthy root, ready to grow. A year passed. It was Chip's second birthday. My apartment was full of light and laughter. My parents had driven down from the suburbs. The general was there, sitting in the corner, looking content as he watched Chip run around with a balloon. He was showing Chip how to salute, and Chip was giggling, flapping his hand against his forehead. I was in the kitchen, icing the cake, when there was a knock at the door. It was Dr. David Evans, a pediatrician I had met recently through work. He was handsome, kind, and wonderfully normal. He had asked me out for coffee 3 times. I had declined 3 times. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I would ever be ready to trust again. But he was persistent in a gentle way. "I know I wasn't invited," he said, standing in the hallway, holding a wrapped gift. "But I remembered you mentioned it was today. I just wanted to drop this off for the little guy. It's a dinosaur set. Boys like dinosaurs, right?" I looked at him. He was nothing like Curtis. He didn't have the swagger. He didn't have the insecurity. He had kind eyes and a smile that reached them. "You can come in," I said, surprising myself. "There's plenty of cake." "Are you sure?" he asked, hesitating. "I don't want to intrude on family time." "I'm sure," I said. "But just so you know, my life is complicated. My ex-husband is in prison for trying to kill me. My father-in-law is a retired general who is sitting in my living room. And I have a very low tolerance for nonsense. If you are looking for a damsel in distress, you're at the wrong apartment." Dr. Evans laughed. It was a warm, deep sound. "I like complicated. And I have zero nonsense to offer. I just like you, Marlene. And I like dinosaurs." "Come in, David," I said, opening the door wider. As he walked in and introduced himself to my parents, I looked around the room. I saw my son laughing. I saw my parents smiling. I saw the general at peace, shaking David's hand with a firm grip. I walked over to the window and looked out at the Boston skyline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The storm was over. The wreckage had been cleared. I wasn't just a survivor of a bad marriage. I wasn't just a victim of a poisoning plot. I was the architect of a new life. I had walked through fire, faced down a conspiracy, and come out the other side with the only thing that mattered, my son and my self-respect. I watched David sit down on the floor and roar like a T-Rex for Chip. Chip shrieked with delight. Maybe I could trust again. Not today, maybe. But someday. And that possibility was enough. They say that betrayal breaks you. And it does. It shatters the image of the world you thought you lived in. It makes you question your judgment, your worth, and your sanity. It makes you look at a cup of tea and wonder if it's poison. It makes you look at a smile and wonder if it's a mask. But here is what they don't tell you: the breaking is necessary. If I hadn't broken, I would still be the woman drinking that tea, desperate for a crumb of affection from a man who hated me. If I hadn't broken, I wouldn't have found the strength to fight a corporation, a corrupt officer, and a toxic family dynasty. I wouldn't have found the strength to save my son. I look at Chip now, sleeping in his room, safe and loved, and I know that every tear, every moment of terror in that hospital hallway, every lawyer's fee was worth it. To anyone listening to this who feels trapped, who feels like they are living a lie, or who suspects that the person they love isn't who they say they are, trust your gut. Your intuition is your superpower. It's the whisper that tells you to record the call at 3 a.m. It's the nudge that tells you to check the compost bin. It's the voice that says, "I deserve better than this." Listen to it. Don't let anyone, not a mother-in-law, not a charming husband, not society, tell you that you are crazy. You are not crazy. You are observant. I'm Marlene Anderson. I survived the storm. I burned the secrets. And I built a castle from the ashes. And if I can do it, so can you. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I hope it gives strength to even one person out there. If you enjoyed this, please like the video, share it with a friend who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of survival and justice. And remember, you are stronger than you think. Until next time. And so, as Marlene's journey comes to a close, we are left with a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Her story is not just one of survival but of transformation, a testament to the strength it takes to rebuild your life from the ashes of betrayal and pain. It teaches us that even in our darkest moments, we have the ability to choose courage over despair, truth over lies, and self-worth over compromise. Marlene's ability to confront the storm, protect her child, and demand justice highlights the importance of trusting your instincts and standing firm in your values. Her journey reminds us that adversity can break us, but it can also shape us into stronger, wiser versions of ourselves. The scars we carry are not symbols of weakness, they are proof that we fought, endured, and overcame. What lessons from Marlene's story resonate with you? Share your thoughts below, or simply comment good if you found her strength inspiring. Let's keep this conversation alive and remind each other that we are capable of extraordinary things.